participants, greetings of the day. Today we will discuss counseling for personal growth and adjustment, and in this unit we will take up the area theory of counseling. We will discuss the Geatalt counseling theory. The Geatalt theory is an existential experimental form of psychotherapy that emphasizes personal responsibilities and that focuses upon the individual's experiences in the present moment. The counselor-client relationship, the environmental and social context of a person's life, and the self-regulating adjustments people make as the result of their overall situation. Gestalt theory essentially rests four loading-bearing walls: phenomenological method, dialogical relationships, field theoretical strategies, and experimental freedom. Although all these tenets were present in the early formation and practices of Gestalt theory, as described in Ego, Hunger, and Aggression. The human personality of Gestalt theory, the earlier development of Gestalt theory emphasizes personal experiences and experiential episodes understood as safe energies or experiments. Indeed, half of the Pearls, Halferline and Goldman book consist of such experiments. Later, through the influence of such people as Irving and Miran Polster, a second theoretical emphasis emerged, namely contact between self and other, auditively the dialogical relationship between counselor and client. Later, still field theory emerges as an emphasis. At various times over the decades since Gestalt theory first emerged, one or more of these tenets and the associated constructs that go with them have captured the imagination of those who have continued developing the contemporary theory of Gestalt theory. Since the year 1990, the literature focused upon Gestalt theory has flourished, including the development of several professional Gestalt journals. Along the way, Gestalt theory has also been applied in organizational development and coaching work, and more recently Gestalt method have been combined with meditation practices into a unified program of human development called Gestalt practices, which is used by some practitioners. Phenomenological method. The goal of a phenomenological exploration is an awareness. This exploration works systematically to reduce the effect of biases through repeated observations and inquiries. The fundamental aspects of behavioral counseling theory have been identified in various ancient philosophical traditions, particularly Stoicism. The phenomenological method comprises three steps: the rule of epicure, the rule of description, and the rule of horizontalization. Applying the rule of epicure, one sets aside one's initial biases and prejudices in order to suspend expectations and assumptions. Applying the rule of description, one occupies oneself with describing instead of explaining. Applying the rule of authorization and threats, each item of description as having equal value or significance. The rule of epicure sets aside any initial theories with regards to what is presented in the meeting between counselor and the client. The rule of description implies immediate and specific observations, abstaining from interpretation, oral explanation, especially those formed from application of a clinical theory superimposed over the circumstances of the experiences. The rule of the horizontalization avoids any hierarchical assignment of importance such that the data of experience become prioritized and categorized as they are received. A Gestalt counselor utilizing the phenomenological method might say something like inoctic, a silent tension at the corners of mouth. When I say that and I see you shifting on the couch and folding your arms across your chest, and now I see you are rolling your eyes back. Of course, the counselor may make a clinically relevant evaluation, but when applying the phenomenological method, temporarily suspended the needs to express it. Dialogical relationship. To create the conditions under which a dialogical moment might occur, the counselor attends to his or her own presence, creates the space for the client to enter in and become present, as well as, which is called inclusion, and commits him or other self to the dialogues process, surrendering to what takes places and opposes to attempting to control it. With presence, the counselor judiciously shows up as whole and authentic person instead of assuming a role, false, self or personal. The word judicious used above refers to the counselors taking into account the specific strength, weakness and values. The only good client is a live client. So, driving a client away by injudicious exposure of intolerable to the client experiences of the counselor is very obvious counterproductive. For example, for an aesthetic counselor to tell a devout out client that religious is myth would not be useful, especially in the early stages of the relationship. To practice inclusion is to accept the client chooses to be present, whether in a defensive and obnoxious stance or a superficiality cooperative one. To practice inclusion is to support the presence of the client, including his or her resistance, not as a gimmick but influence realization that this is how the client is actually present and is the best this client can do at that time. Finally, the Gestalt counselor is committed to the process, trusts in that process and does not attempt to save him or himself from it. The field can be considered in two ways. Here are some theoretical strategies. There are ontological dimensions and there are phenomenological dimensions to one's field. The phenomenological dimensions are all those physical and environmental contexts in which we lived and move. They might be the office in which one works, the house in which one lives, the city and country of which one is a citizen, and so forth. The ontological field is the objective reality that supports our physical existence. The ontological dimensions are all mental and physical dynamics that contributes to a person's sense of self, one's subjective experiences, not merely elements of the environmental context. These might be the memory of an uncle's inappropriate affection, one's color blindness, one's sense of social matrices in operation at the office in which one works, and so forth. The way that Gestalt counselors chooses to work with field dynamics makes what they do strategic. Gestalt therefore focuses upon character structure. According to Gestalt theory, the character structure is dynamic rather than fixed in nature. To become aware of one's character structure, the focus is upon the phenomenological dimension in the context of the ontological dimensions. There are some experimental freedoms in Gestalt theory is distinct because it moves towards the action away from mere talk theory, and for this reason is considered an experimental approach. Through experiments, the counselor supports the client's direct experiences of something new. instead of merely talking about the possibility of something new. Indeed, the entire therapeutic relationship may be considered experimental because at one level it is correct. Relation experiences for many clients, and it is a safe emergency that is free to turn out however it will. An experiment can also become conceived as a teaching method that creates an experience in which a client might learn something as a part of their growth. Example might include, rather than talking about the client's critical parents, a Gestalt counselors might task the client to imagine the parents is present, or that the counselor is the parent and talk to that parent directly. If a client is struggling with how to be assertive, a Gestalt counselor could either have the client say some assertive things to the counselor or members of a therapeutic group, or give a talk about through one should never be assertive. And the third is, a Gestalt counselor might notice something about the non-verbal behavior or tone of voice of the client. Then the counselor might have the client exaggerate the non-verbal behavior and pay attention to that experience. The Gestalt counselor might work with the breathing or postural of client and direct awareness to change that might happen when the client talks about different content. With all these experiments, the Gestalt counselor is working with process rather than content. The how rather that the what regulation of the boundary. The boundary set between person and environment should be penetrable to latex changes, yet another strong to be autonomous. One should be able to exclude toxins in the environment, but nourishing also should be discriminated in accordance with dominant needs. Metabolic processes are managed by the laws of homeostasis. The most vital need activates the organism until it is satisfied or is replaced by a more crucial need. Living is a succession of needs, either met or not met, reaching homeostasis balance and moving to the new moment and next need. Here are some disturbances of the contact boundaries. In case of the boundary is unclear, gone or impassable, this leads to a disorder of the distinction between self and other, and then contact and awareness are disturbed too. When boundary functions well, people change connecting and separating and alternate between withdrawals from the environment and being in contact with it. The boundary of contact is gone in absolutely contradictory ways in joining together and separation. In fusion, the isolation and distinction between self and others become uncertain, then the boundary disappears. In isolation, the boundary turns solid, that coherence is lost. That means that significance of others for the self is replaced from awareness. Retroflexion is a division within the self, preventing the aspects of the self with the self. This replaces self from environment, like in doing to self what is desired to do to the other one, or doing for self what is desired to do by the other one for self. This scheme brings a separation. The illusion of self-sufficiency is a sample of the reflection as it substitutes self from environment. Though one can breathe and chew for oneself, the air and food is provided by environment. Introspection is a type of retroreflection which is either pathological or healthy. For instance, refusing to accept the impulse to convey anger can help to manage hazardous environment. Under the circumstances, biting one's lip can be more practical than biting words. Via introjection, foreign material is taken in without discriminating or assimilation. Swelling whole contributes to creation of an as if personality and irreflexible character. Introjected principles and actions are acquired in animopposing manner. Like in all disturbances of this kind, swelling whole is at times normal or pathological in accordance with the situation and level of awareness. For instance, students studying something on lectures with complete awareness, what they redoing, make a copy, remember and repeat the material without complete digestion or understanding. Projection is a process when self and other are confused, that is caused by ascribing to the outside something which is actually self. Art can be a model of healthy projection, but when the person does not have awareness and admits responsibility for something projected, then pathological projection appears. Deflection is the evasion of awareness and contract turning aside. It is similar to the situation when somebody is well mannered instead of being direct. Deviation can be achieved by not telling directly or by refuse to receive. The personifically persons either untouched or unaffected and puzzled as he does not notable what is desired by him. Deflection can be of use where with awareness it answers the requirement in the current situation. For example, when cooling down is needed, different impulse of deflection involves method do not looking at a person, worldliness, elusiveness, understanding and speaking about more than two. Next we have awareness. Awareness and dialogue are among the most important therapeutic instrument of Gestalt theory. Such form of understanding as awareness can be freely characterized as being connected with the existence of the person with something that answers what is questioned. We have some responsibility while counseling as per the Gestalt theory. People in accordance with Gestalt theory are in change or responsible. That means they can determine the way to behave. Confusing accountability with should and blaming. They force and manipulates. They make effort and are not impulsive and integrated. At these moments, their actual wants, responses and needs of the environment and options in the situation are neglected and they either comply with shoulds or reject them. Gestalt's counselor consider that it is essential to make a distinction or distinct clearly between one's want and what is given to the person. Person are in charge of their behavior. For instance, people are in charge of their behavior and protection of the environment. When you blame something outside yourself, you deceive yourself. You can blame genetics, for instance, or parents. Taking responsibility for what one did not choose, a typical shame reaction, is also a deception. Every person is in charge of the moral choice he makes. Gestalt theory can help the person to understand what can be considered moral and what not. We have some practices, procedures of Gestalt theory. The central focuses of the work of a Gestalt counselor is on contact. This includes the philethora of all complex internal responses and external patterns of behavior that are employed in the contact processes. Contact is the defining characteristics of all the methods Gestalt counselors use in order to bring about change. The method of Gestalt theory comprises basically 5 groups: the therapeutic relationship, phenomenological method, the experiment, the work with cognition, and work with the wider field. The counselor has some relationship also. An authentic, non-judgmental dialogue relationship between client and Gestalt counselor is the crucible of change. In order to exchange phenomenologists, a Gestalt counselor must bring a willingness and capabilities to be present as a person in their therapeutic encounter, inclusive of his or her inner world, sense of experience, knowledge, skills, etc., and a genuine interest in understanding the client's subjective experiences and needs from the environment. Both creates the relationship and allow the figure to emerge from the dialogue. Verbal as well as non-verbal behavior is considered a valuable part of the counter to discover together the quality of experiences, awareness, beliefs, and typical pattern of contact. We have some phenomenological methods with a phenomenological attitude. The Gestalt counselor is open to and encounter the client to reveal who he really is and how she functions in the world. It is the client, not the counselor, who gives a meaning to his or her individual way of being. Applying a phenomenological method allows the Gestalt counselor to attack a unique information of the client to theoretically construct in relation to his or her individual experiences without imposing a particular direction upon the client. It is the actual surface behavior that makes the precedence over any and all interpretations. The counselors brackets his or her own experiences to describe the presentation of the client, which nurtures the development of awareness and contact. We have some views of human nature of Gestalt theory. A Gestalt means a whole, and Gestalt theory is based on the person feeling whole or a complete in their life. Gestalt theory is considered to be a here and now theory focusing on awareness with the belief that when one focuses on what they are and not what they wish to become, they become self-actualized. The idea being that through self-acceptance, one becomes self-actualized. The Gestaltists believe that the individual naturally seeks to become an integrated whole living productivity. Gestaltists and anti-deterministic because they believe that people have the ability to change and become responsible. Gestalt borrows heavily from the viewpoint of experimentalist and phenomenologicalist with the emphasis on the present and awareness. Gestalt focuses on the client's own inner world of interpretation and assessment of the present life situation. Gestaltists believe that individuals emphasize intellectual experiences, diminishing the importance of emotions and senses, resulting in an inability to respond to the situation or the events in their life. Gestaltists believe that thoughts, feelings and reactions to the past events or situations can impede personal functioning and prevent here and now awareness. The most common unfinished business is that of not forgiving one's parent for perceived mistakes in one's parenting. The another is awareness is considered on a continuum with the healthiest person being most aware. These people are aware of their needs and deal with them one at a time. The emphasis is on reality and not on embellished or imagined needs. The individual recognizes their internal needs and meets that needs through manipulation of the needs and the environment. Difficult ways may arise in several ways. We can take up the difficulties one by one. Loss of contact with the environment and its resources, loss of contact with self-thought, over-involvement with the environment, and third is fail to put aside unfinished business, loss of gestalt resulting in fragmentation or scattering, and the fifth is experience conflict between what one should do and what one wants to do. Experience difficulty with life's dichotomies, that is love, hate, pleasure, pain, masculinity, femininity. These are the various areas. Now we will discuss the role of a counselor here. Counselor creates an environment for the client to explore their needs in order to grow. The counselor is fully with the client in the here and now with intense personal involvement and honesty. The counselor helps the client to focus on blocking energy and to positively and adaptively use that energy. The counselor also helps the client to disconcern their life partners. Among the rules that counselor use to help clients, the principle of the now requires the counselor to use the present tense. And thou means that the client must address the person directly rather than talk about them or to the counselor about them, making the client use the I instead of referring to own experiences in the second you or third it person. The use of an awareness continuum that focuses on how and what rather than on why. The counselor has the client convert questions into a statement. As per DSM-4, categories and standardized assessment is not considered necessary within this theory. We have some goals of counseling also. The emphasis is on here and now of the client's experiences. The client is encouraged to make choices based on now as opposed to the past. Help the client resolve the past and assist the client to become congruent. Help the client to reach maturity intellectually. Help the client shed neurosis. We have some techniques of counseling of Gestalt theory also. Techniques in Gestalt theory, one of the two forms, either an exercise or an experiment. Exercise includes activities such as frustration actions, fantasy, role playing, fantasy and psychodrama. Experiments are unplanned, creative interventions that grow out of the here and now interaction between the client and the counselor. Dream work in Gestalt theory consists of the client telling the dream and then focusing their awareness on the dream from the perspective of each character or element in the dream. Empty chair is a process where the client addresses parts of the personality as if it were an entity sitting in an empty chair. The client may switch perspective by switching chair or may simply address the chair. The techniques is contradictory for severely disturbed clients. Confrontation is another of the Gestalt exercise that is very powerful. Basically, the counselor calls attention to the incongruence between the client's and verbalization and observed emotions or behavior. Making the rounds in a group exercise in which the client is instructed to say the same sentence to each member of the group and then adding something personal to each person. Take responsibility is the phrase that follows each statement, expressing statement or perceptions that the client states. The process is to help the client to integrate their internal perceptions and their behaviors. Exaggeration is over dramatizing the client gesture and movement to help gain insight into their meaning. May I feed you a sentence is the question that the counselor asks before giving the client a more specific expression of what the counselor believes is the underlying message of the client. At the end, we can say that Gestalt counseling theory is the theory of personality organization and the dynamics of personality development that guides counselors. It is a clinical method of treating client. Thank you very much and do take very good care of yourself.